Welcome to a fun and exciting episode of High Impact Motorsports Garage as I work on a wire harness. Wiring harnesses are a necessary evil for electronic fuel-injected vehicles. It's the fact of life. And if you are doing your own standalone harness, most likely you're going to make a harness from scratch for that vehicle. That's just the way it works. And it's the most difficult thing for people to wrap their head around. It's the part of the job that a lot of folks, they get lost on. There's some procedures to do, some techniques to follow in order to do it right. So let's show you how it's done. The first step in this job is starting with the ECU connector. So most of the time you get an ECU connector that has this X number of wire harness coming off of it. It's going to go a certain number of feet long. But each of these wires go to a specific location. And it's going to be different depending on your application. But the principle I'm going to show you here is going to matter. I like starting out by going pin by pin, and I pull the harness and I label each of the wires. So here we've got these labels right here, and like injector pin number 2, this one's injector pin number 1, and what we do is I will go pin by pin with each of these wires and identify what they are. And I do that starting with a wiring diagram. So this wiring diagram is pretty much set for this vehicle. So I just start with the ECU connector and I go to each of the different terminated points and I figure it out from there. And then it's a matter of, once I get that, then I can add in my power from my relays and then start terminating it. But before I even think about that, I need to know what terminal of each of these wires goes where, so I know where to deliver the power. Alright, so the next step, here we've got the harness, and I have separated it out into different branches, and we've got everything pinned out and labeled out where it needs to go. Now, something like, for example, the sensor harness, each of those sensor connections needs a 5-volt reference and a ground, or well, not each of them, but most of them will need a 5-volt reference and ground. So what I'm going to want to do is sub-branch this out and supply that to each of these, and then add in the ground circuit for those. And the same with the ignition circuit, the same with the fuel circuit, and then also adding in all the relays for such. And that's probably my next step now. All right, with the harness pinned out where I want it to be, where all the wiring is pinned, there are things I can add to it. I just talked about that. One of the things I need to do is I need to pull out of the old harness the things I need. So let's get to that. Alright, so it's taken a minute, but here's the wire harness on the floor, the original engine harness, which I have taken out this grouping of wires. This gives me my plugs that will interface into the vehicle with the wiring that goes to the wiper motor, which is still in there, and some feeds in that I'll be able to use to power up the Standalone. And when I do this, this will plug into the factory harness, into the car, and then power the Standalone harness, hopefully. Okay, so now that I've got the electrical connectors, or the section of the wire harness from the old engine harness that I have pulled out that I'm going to use, and now that I've also got most of the wires kind of labeled out and wired out or laid out on the harness, then now I get to go to the car and I'm going to figure out where the lengths are going to be. I'm going to route it. I have a broad idea of where I'm going to put it. Now I need to figure out where those points are so that I can mark them off, and then once it's pre-fitted I can come back, I can start terminating wiring. So at this point, the wire harness is now pretty much sized up about where I want it to be, and it still looks like a jumbled mess. But that's fine, because I now know where I can start to terminate things. It means now I can start adding grounds, I can start adding connectors, I can start terminating the harness. Terminating the harness is really the final phase of getting this shaped up right. And then once it's terminated, then I can go through, start plugging it in for the final assembly. And of course there's a lot of assembly that's going to happen in order for this to work. So we still have to get, we have to have a working harness to do that though. So we're going to get that going, and so the next step is terminating a harness. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get to terminating this wire harness, and it should be done like... Alright, there we go. So, just like a snap of the fingers. So what we've done here is I now have the underdash component ready. I added in all the ground wiring, and so now all the grounds are wired in and it's branched out where it needs to go, and it is ready for connectors at this point. Now, what I've done is I've made sure that the underdash component is all ready to install in like a final assembly mode. It's basically that underdash component's ready, so I can sit this at this grommet at the firewall, and then I can very accurately pinpoint this out to where it needs to go, and each of these then I can terminate the pins on each of those as I start assembling the engine back together again. So let's go ahead and put that harness that's on the floor in front of me on the car. Let's plug that in, and then we'll start the process of final truncating this mess. When doing wiring, there are two ways of terminating a connector. Option number one is to use a pigtail and connect it in. I like using heat shrink crimp connectors, the non-insulated type that you use a good crimping tool with. This is preferred if you have a connector that's not readily available that you need to use from an old harness. What is more preferred is getting a connector and pin kit and using an actual brand new connector and running the wires in and properly terminating to this. In both cases, it is extremely important to make sure that you know which pin goes where, and when you're looking at diagrams, make sure that most of the time they're going to give you the orientation of the back of the connector, not the face of the connector. So you need to know the orientation of the pin on the wires and know which wire goes to what. In the case of this fuel tech unit, what I've ran into is this is the crank angle sensor connector, and you can note that the color of the wires is green and red and yellow, or white and blue. But these are the connector colors that they're calling out. Well, it turns out that the harness side is a different color. And then on top of that, the colors on their harness that they provide don't match the colors that they're giving you from here. So you have to read carefully and you have to go dig. So when terminating a wire harness, when you have the connectors brand new and pins, there are special ways of doing this. I'll show you. This is the pin or the connector with pins that we're going to put onto this car. We're going to use a special crimping tool. We're going to use this crimping tool right here, which is going to actually bend those ears down and give us a good solid crimp. And we're going to strip back the wires with this little guy right here, and we're going to use some just standard diagonal cutters to even everything up. So we're going to start with the pigtail right here. So this is the untrimmed wiring. So this goes to the ignition coil. We're going to find the shortest lead, which is right there, and we're going to come in and we're going to trim everything to that length, okay? And I've already verified that this is long enough with enough strain relief for us to do what we need to do. So now you see that, that's nice and about even. First thing to do, now I've got this bound right here. I'm going to take and we're going to undo this. Pull that back. We're going to allow this harness to kind of open up. So I've also got the wire diagram here, and it shows the pin orientation on this connector. And if we open up this bag right here, make sure we don't lose any of these pins. So set that aside. If you look here, the pin connector is in fact labeled along this edge right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to pop these wires in the appropriate order. So pin A, according to our diagram, is the ignition signal, which is this gray wire. Now some of these connectors don't work this way. Okay, so gray wire comes through, pull it all the way through. Our power wire is E. So pull that all the way through. Our solid black wire is the ground, which is the center wire, which is pin C. And pins B and D are these other ground wires, which are actually more signal ground, more for stabilization of the signal. So those go in. All right, and we got that all the way through. And now the next step is for us to put a little bit of an end on this. So we're going to go and put the wire into the crimper. Okay, so we're going to put it into the crimper right there. We just need a little bit. That way we can crimp onto it. So there's a little bit there. We'll go do all these. So now we got all these stripped back. And take these pins. And if you look at the pin, it's
got kind of a receiver, if you would, where the wires are going to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push this together just a little bit so it's going to have no problem later on. And it doesn't really matter the order we start crimping these in on, but we'll crimp them in. So, get that in there. My hands are a little shaky today, I don't know why. It's gonna go like this. Okay, so come in like this. Okay. And we're gonna make sure that on the back side that wire is in, but not the insulation all the way in. We want the insulation to be up to the base of the crimpers, and we're gonna crimp down. Okay, so crimp down, pull it back, and there is a nice crimp. And then we're going to go back to here to the strainer leaf end. And same. All right, let's go ahead and crimp the rest of these. Alright, so now we got all these connectors, these little pins on. Let's go ahead and do the next phase, which is actually just pulling it through. And on these type of connector, pull them back and pull them in. And there's a little aligning tang on the pins that need to get aligned as they go in. So come out. And that can go there, and that can go there. Okay, so we're all there, and we pull it back, and we want them to all seat. There's little clips that hold them in place. They'll seat, and then the next step is to take this rubber grommet and push that in. And now we've got a connector. So we've got this one, and then we're just going to take this guy right here, do the same thing. Pull this through. You just see it comes right on in like that. There we go. And then we got one more to do after this. All right, so here's the outcome of these coils wiring. So I'll connect, here's the outcome of the coil wiring. We got these connectors on them, and I've actually put little masking tape tabs on them to identify which is which. So looks like we're good to go on this portion. Alright, so now we've got the wire harness in. We've got most of it plugged in with the exception of the ignition coils. We don't have any of those mounted. We've got everything else hooked up. You can see how it's routed, it's installed, it's plugged in, and now it's just a matter of seeing if it works. Alright, I got that mounted right there, just temporarily, just kind of resting there. What I want to do is I want to see if it powers up, and it powers up. Let's see, let's do a quick TPS sweep and see if that works. Oh, well, alright, that's right, throttle cable's not hooked up. Alright, well, that is building a wire harness for an RX7, but the principles apply to pretty much every wire harness you're ever going to build. The idea is you just have to take your time, route things carefully, think things out, plan things out, and then just a quick little note at the very end of this. Make sure you allow for enough strain length so that the harness has some give to it. You don't want a harness that's super tight, otherwise, you know, you could have big problems going on. And then make sure you have ways to secure that harness so that it's secured and it's not, so the wires aren't under stress, but at the same time that the harness isn't dragging around on other equipment. At any rate, thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and hope that helped you in some way.